These are the Scape ND filters for the iPhone. Landscape photographers often consider neutral density filters their secret weapon of choice. ND filters make it much easier to control the exposure of an image. Their main function is reducing the amount of light coming into the camera lens, which is not only great for photography, but is particularly helpful when shooting video outdoors. It provides a more cinematic look without having to crank up your shutter speed. To summarize, ND filters are best to use when you want to improve high dynamic range, add motion blur to moving objects, and have more cinematic control over exposure without sacrificing correct shutter speed. Setting up our ND filters is easy. You screw the lens onto the clip, then simply open up the clip and position it over your camera lens. And you're ready to shoot. Video capture is where the ND filters really shine. We recommend using a third-party app to get the most out of your camera and your filter setup. For cinematic, high-quality video, we recommend using Filmic Pro. It offers you full control over your camera's ISO, shutter speed, and a whole lot more. Before we show you why ND filters are essential for properly exposing your image, we have to cover some photography terms. The exposure triangle includes shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. They all have different ways of controlling the amount of light coming into the camera. Shutter speed is the length of time the camera shutter is open to expose light. It's measured in fractions of a second. A slow shutter speed is good for low light situations and for capturing videos with smooth motion blur. Fast shutter speeds are good for capturing clear moving objects, filming sports for example. Aperture is an opening in the lens that dilates like an eye, letting in varying degrees of light. The wider the opening, the more light that comes in, and vice versa. Aperture also affects the amount of blur or bokeh that appears behind the focused area. ISO is a method of electronically increasing and decreasing sensitivity to light. However, the higher the ISO, the more unwanted gain and noise you will see on your image. When it comes to iPhone photography, we only need to worry about shutter speed and ISO, because the camera lenses are so small that they don't have the ability to adjust aperture. When using Filmic Pro, you can adjust this wheel to automatically balance ISO and shutter speed to properly expose your image. The problem is when you do this, it breaks an essential rule of thumb. Your shutter speed should always be double your frame rate. If we're shooting 24 frames per second, the shutter speed should be 1/48th. This rule gives moving objects the correct amount of motion blur to match what the human eye sees, creating a more cinematic look. In Filmic Pro, if you lock the ISO and move the shutter speed to 1/48th, you can clearly see that the shot is blown out. This is where ND filters become essential. They block enough light for you to properly expose your shot while still maintaining the shutter speed rule. If it's a clear sunny day, you'll most likely have to use the ND16 or ND8. To illustrate how motion blur looks different across varying shutter speeds, these are two examples on the opposite end of the shutter speed spectrum. The movement in the bottom image appears more cinematic, while the top image with a faster shutter speed is the quality you're used to with a typical iPhone camera. You can particularly notice it when you pause the images. ND filters are certainly not just for videos. They work great with photography as well. This picture is a good example of using the ND filter to capture details in the bright sky while maintaining tons of details in the foreground below it. Without a filter, it's kind of an endless battle trying to balance the overexposed sky with the underexposed foreground. Here's an example of how the ND filter can assist with capturing motion blur photography as well. You'll need to take a long exposure shot in a lower light situation. You'll also need something to keep your camera perfectly steady. If the iPhone's built-in long exposure feature isn't capturing the effect you want, we recommend using a third-party camera app like ProCam. When a lens filter is uncoated, it's more likely to create a lens flare, which can be nice if you're going for a specific stylized look. However, it can be limiting. That's why our ND filters are multi-coated, offering enhanced quality with a more accurate transmission of light and colors. The screw-on clip is made of a strong plastic and features rubber pads on the inside to protect your camera lens and the exterior of your iPhone from scratches and abrasions. While it was designed and built for the iPhone first, it does work on a number of Android phones as well. Here's a list of models compatible with the lens attachment clip.